Kanban and Evolutionary Management, and what can we learn from one of the great philosophers of the 20th century? Not as well known, Bruce Lee actually was a philosopher. He had a degree in philosophy from the University of Washington in Seattle. And what's been more interesting for me initially was studying his philosophy, and then more recently studying the challenges that he faced developing his own style of Kung Fu, because it wasn't even a style, it was a style for developing a style. And there's a lot of parallels with the challenges that we've faced in developing Kanban as an idea and as a management method. So Bruce Lee rejected the idea of what are known as patterned styles of Kung Fu. And he rejected them on the notion that they gave someone skilled in the art a false sense of capability. That it may have been very well when they were fighting in a competition, but if they happened to be walking down a dark alley in Hong Kong and somebody jumped out of the shadows and attacked them, then they may have this belief that they knew how to street fight and that would probably get them killed. So he decided that a different approach was required. Well, if you're like me, what you know about Kung Fu, you learned from taking your kids to see Fu Panda. And in that movie, that series of movies, they simplify the styles of Kung Fu down to these four: tiger, mantis, snake, and monkey. And they talk about, that each one of these has a different way of fighting. Well, actually, this is from Wikipedia here. This is just what are called the traditional styles. There are more than 60 of them. And if you were to scroll down to the modern and hybrid styles, you'd learn that there's actually over 100. But the four from the Kung Fu Panda are actually there. Monkey, tiger, snake, mantis. There are actually some variants of those amongst these 63. Lee referred to the teaching of these pattern styles using kata, the performing of certain movements and learning them as muscle memory. He referred to that as dryland swimming. He really wanted to denigrate it because he wanted to get across the idea that you could practice swimming on dry land, but you're never really going to know what it feels like to swim until somebody throws you in the deep end. And then you actually have to keep your head above water. So he really believed that if somebody wanted to learn hand-to-hand combat, they should learn it by fighting other people. And that dryland swimming was going to give them a false sense of their capability. So he took the concepts of hand-to-hand fighting back to its basics, and he came up with the four ranges of combat: kicking, punching, trapping, and grappling. And then he said, okay, what we need to do is have a range of techniques for kicking, a range of techniques for punching, a range of techniques for trapping, a range for grappling, and teach people those techniques in a way where they can experiment with them and decide which ones work best for them and which other ones they feel aren't very good for them, and they choose not to adopt them. Also, the 5 ways of attack, which incidentally has 6 ways. This is observation that what we have here is evolution in action, because Lee's approach is an evolutionary method. It's very much modern from a Kung Fu perspective. So I won't bother to read these, but 4 ranges of combat, 5 ways of attack, and you teach people to do this stuff using live opponents. And they learn iteratively what's going to work for them, what doesn't work so well for them, and they develop their own personal style. So if there were 5 million people practicing Lee's approach, you'd have 5 million different styles. They're not patterned, and you don't learn from the pattern. You learn by evolution. So, of course, he came under pressure to give his style of Kung Fu, which of course wasn't a style at all, a name. Well, one of the moves that was perhaps differentiating to his approach was intercepting fists, I guess, punches. So he adopted the name Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. And then he was very swift to tell people, but it's just a name. Don't get hung up on the name. Don't get hung up on just one maneuver. We need a way of picking up this set of ideas and carrying them around and communicating them to people. This is the symbol that was developed for the Jeet Kune Do movement, and written in Chinese around the side, it says, using no way as way. What that means is there's no patterned style. The Jeet Kune Do way is that there is no way. There is no kata you can learn. And then having no limitation as limitation, this was Lee permission giving really a traditional Chinese audience, because Jeet Kune Do includes, at least during Lee's lifetime, included épée fencing, which he learned in Europe. And he taught lessons from épée fencing within his set of, I guess, possible ways of parrying. And of course, traditional Chinese people are going to look at something from Europe and say, that's not for us, that's not what we do, it's not our tradition. So Lee was giving people permission to look for the best solutions wherever you might find them and to consider adopting and adapting them. So having no limitation is the second side of it. And he used this analogy with Jeet Kune Do that it was like filling a glass with water and then pouring it out and then refilling it and pouring it out. The idea was that you filled up the glass with a number of new techniques and then you experimented with them. And if you liked them, you kept them. Otherwise, you poured them out, threw them away, tried something else. His direct quote here is, absorb that which is useful, discard the remainder. The key to this evolutionary approach is that you learn by fighting directly with an opponent. And if you're at Bruce Lee's level, that means that opponent needs to be really well protected. So a lot of the enabling technology for Jeet Kune Do was actually protective clothing. In comparison, the idea of patterned style based on a kata, there is no learning in that. The only learning is learning how to copy the kata. The kata themselves do not evolve, and they certainly do not evolve in real time when someone is faced with a street fight in Hong Kong, which is the problem space that he was thinking about. Okay, we don't have Dave Snowden on our program this week. How many of you know Dave? Quite a few in the audience, right? So if we use Dave Snowden's Cynefin framework, and for those of you who didn't have your hand up, he divides the world into these 5 domains: simple, complicated, complex, chaotic, and the one in the middle I haven't labeled is called disorder. If we were to view Bruce Lee's approach to Kung Fu through a Cynefin lens, the Cynefin framework we have here, what would it tell us? Well, first of all, in the simple domain, this is the idea that there's only one way to do something. You can explain it with a simple equation. There's a best practice. In the complicated domain, there are probably many ways to do things, and you wouldn't necessarily know which was better. So we talk about the idea of good practices. In the complex domain, we actually have to react to conditions that we don't necessarily understand or cannot explain or are changing as we're busy doing something. There we need emergent practices. And in a chaotic domain where we actually don't understand it yet, then we need to evolve novel practice. Well, if we think about Kung Fu, an individual kata is like a best practice for doing one thing. An entire pattern style exists in the complicated domain. And if there are 63 different traditional pattern styles, that's an example that there are 63 good practices. Jeet Kune Do belongs over here. Right? It's an evolutionary method that is intended to allow people to adapt their style, so it's emergent practice, and also to be able to react to conditions in a live situation and adapt quickly. So really, Lee's genius was to recognize that hand-to-hand combat was a complex domain problem. It's not merely an ordered, reductionist thinking domain problem that can be solved with a pattern style. That pattern styles work very well when you have an ordered domain, a competition, where you know the other guy is fighting you with the same pattern style. As soon as you take the combatants out of that ordered domain and put them in a different world where they don't have to play by those rules, it's no longer ordered. Right? It's no longer deterministic. It's no longer about who can execute one kata against another the fastest. Right? It requires comprehend what's happening in the real world right now and react to it and adapt accordingly. You can skip past that slide because I've explained it. Okay, so my motivation for what's become known as the Kanban Method, because I stupidly didn't give it a name. And then people said, noticed that, the unique and different thing about it was the use of Kanban Systems, so it got called Kanban. But actually, there was a lot more to it. Well, my key motivation was recognizing that the real problem was change management in organizations. So first of all, traditional change process. Typically, we understand what we do now. Maybe we don't understand it yet. Maybe we need a consultant who comes in and they understand it for us and they write it down and then they tell us, this is what you do now. So we have our current process, and that's presumably not good enough. That's why we need to change. And then somebody tells us what our future process should be. And that comes in the defined flavor. We got it in a textbook. Or in the designed flavor, where the consultant comes along, understands our current process, and then uses some magic formulas and incantations, like value stream mapping, or the theory of constraints thinking processes, or some other set of these patterns, and uses that to design our future process, which is apparently going to improve things for us. Now that we know where the target is, we then organize some transition to change what we do now into what we're going to do in the future. And we know when we've got there because we're performing all the practices in this future process. We can make a long list of them and start checking them off. We can incentivize middle managers by saying how many of them are you doing, and your annual bonus will be awarded depending on how many of them you've currently achieved. It's all very nice and easy. Right? We can see it, we can measure it, we know when we're done, but does it actually work? Well, it turns out change initiatives fail more than projects do. For those of you who are familiar with things like the Standish Group report that like to tell us how many projects either completely failed or partially failed, but certainly weren't successful, portfolio type projects do much better than change initiatives. Change initiatives fail more than 80% of the time. So the change method that's been around since the 1920s and is largely attributable to McKinsey and is widely adopted by pretty much every consulting firm on the planet, fails more than 80% of the time, almost 100 years after the method was introduced. At what point do we have to stop sticking our fingers in the socket and getting a shock before we start to think, maybe we need to change the way that we manage change? So, as a development manager about a decade ago, I came to the conclusion it really did not matter what process my team were following, because they were all good practices. And if they could follow one of those processes well, we would be producing good results. And often we did. And my boss would call me into the corner office and he'd say, David, your department's just done some amazing stuff. People told me that project was doomed to failure. And yet you delivered it on time and it's very good quality. What the heck are you guys doing? And I would tell him, oh, we're using this particular process. I'd say, oh, that's wonderful. Can you just work with your colleagues and install this same process everywhere? And he's busy thinking, nice promotion to senior vice president for me and healthy pay rise to go with it. And time and again, between 2000 and 2003, this approach failed. Because as we started to scale it out across the organization, people resisted the change with things like, oh, that'll never work here. Our situation is completely different. So I came to the conclusion that actually it was the change that was the problem. It wasn't selecting the right method. And yet, how many of you work in the software industry here? I know we probably still attract a lot of software people. That's actually too many now. I'm disappointed. So hopefully next year when I ask that question, only half the hands go up. The other half will be from other industries. The software industry wastes a lot of energy in some sort of high pissing contest over which methodology is best, when it's not even a complicated domain problem, it's a complex domain problem. And determining best is an endless loop conversation that you can have in the pub until they close down and it's time to go to bed. Right? Selecting the right method isn't going to make a big difference. Right? Doing a method well, that might make a difference. But doing one well compared to doing another one well doesn't make a big difference. Go look in the literature. Look in the literature on really high-performing extreme programming projects and compare them with really high-performing personal software process projects, or Scrum, or Rational Unified Process, or feature-driven development. It doesn't matter. The numbers are all stellar. The real challenge is you can't get there. Daniel Kahneman gave us a model. I was teaching this stuff before his book came out, so there's probably other people either picked up on his earlier research or other people were thinking along similar lines, but I love Kahneman's model because it's very simple. So first of all, very simple model of how the brain works, how we perceive information and make decisions. And all the wiring in our brain, all the sensory perception, he calls that System 1. It's basically pattern matching. Everything we see, hear, smell, touch, it all goes in there. We make instant pattern matching. That's good. It's fast. He calls that the fast brain. It's very slow to learn. Why? Because in order for System 1 to learn, you have to rewire your brain. It is a chemical process and it takes time. It takes hours, days, months, years in some cases. It's learning by experience. Right? System 1 learns the Bruce Lee way by live interaction with the opponent. System 2 is the logical inference engine. Not so many animals on the planet have one of these. In evolutionary biological terms, it's much newer. The logical inference engine is slow. It also tends to be quite error-prone. I think that you're probably all aware of this, particularly if you have kids who have to do homework at night. you will understand that System 2 produces a lot of errors. Right? But it's very fast to learn. When your kids make mistakes in their homework, and if you've got a good enough memory to remember what the heck they're actually learning, then you can teach them how to correct the mistake, and after a few nights, they don't make that mistake in their homework anymore. All good stuff. They'll get a nice grade at the end of the year. So System 2 learns from theory, right? It's model-based learning. All right, so how do we process change? Someone comes along, some consultants that senior management has hired, and they say, we're all going to change to process B, destination process, the nirvana, the future of our company. And what do people actually hear? Well, we have our carbon-based life form on this side of the picture here. And on the other side, we have another worker on the team. He's a silicon-based life form. Silicon-based life form, he logically evaluates the change proposal using System 2 because he only has a System 2. Right? He's entirely inference engine-based. And as long as your change proposal makes logical sense, he's all for it. And we're off and on our transition journey, and the new process will be adopted very quickly, no resistance, as long as it makes logical sense. On the other hand, carbon-based life form here, he feels the change emotionally using System 1, and he adapts slowly because in order to adapt to the changes, he has to rewire his brain. And literally, we feel that as pain. The chemical process of rewiring our brain feels painful to us, and we don't like pain. We prefer not to experience pain as human beings. Why? Why does it have this effect? Well, new processes come with roles and responsibilities, job descriptions and definitions of what people should do and how they should do it. And unfortunately, those things are core to the identity of the individuals and often core to how social status is established within a social group. So when someone comes along and says, your job title's going to change and the description is changing, your role, the responsibilities, the actions you perform are changing, what your brain processes is, you do not value me, my identity has to change, my social status has just been threatened, and after the change is over, I am likely to be a loser. Right? I will feel worse about myself, and my peers will think worse of me, and I will have lost status within the group. Even if System 2 processed the proposal and said, logically, it makes total sense, what System 1 is saying is, whoa, there's nothing in it for me. I'm not going there. Therefore, only the brave, the reckless, or the desperate pursue grand changes. Right. How many of you have heard of the burning platform approach, the John Cotter change approach? Right? Burning platform, desperate, right? Highly motivated individuals. Right. So how many of you run companies that make a profit or managers in profitable companies here? Only one? No, surely more than one. All right, at least half of you work in profitable businesses. Should we set them on fire?
Sure.
I know the owner of your company and I'll report back to him. All right, so the Kanban method rejects the traditional approach to change, right? Start listening for the analogous mapping here to the Bruce Lee story. Right? I believe it's better to avoid resistance than to push harder against it. Do not install new processes. Don't reorganize your business. Right? Kanban method is designed for carbon-based life forms, and it's evolutionary change that's humane because it's designed to not invoke the resistance that is inherent to how System 1 works. In other words, we're talking about billions of years of evolution, and 100 years of change management has been in denial of that. It's about catalyzing improvement, and the main catalysts are the use of Kanban systems and visual boards. The whole method takes its name from the Kanban system, but it's just a name, don't get hung up on it. Kanban's a method without methodology, right? It's a process without process. There is no patterned style. You have to evolve your own style by engaging the enemy directly. A little piece of Bruce Lee's philosophy here. I'm not sure whether this is Taoist or Buddhist or a little bit of both. But it's the idea that in a flow situation, water flows around a rock. And the concept of flow is very core to traditional Chinese martial arts. The idea that your movements should always be flowing and that you shouldn't lose your center of balance. So Lee would talk about be like water. Water flows around the rock. And in martial arts, the rock represents resistance, and the resistance is from the opponent. Right? So metaphorically, the rock represents resistance. In martial arts, the resistance is from the opponent. For us, the resistance is carbon-based life form here, emotionally resisting the proposed change. And it's better if we can avoid hitting this problem at all. Now, I teach entire workshops. They've been 3 days, they're going to be 5 days next year on what if you can't avoid the rock. There's at least one day of the class on that topic. What do you do if you can't avoid it? But there's another day of the class on how do you avoid it in the first place. And when I hear about Kanban initiatives where they essentially failed to install, and then I hear what the consultant did, what they usually did is they didn't follow the advice they would have learned in the coaching masterclass because they did not avoid the rocks. They walked into the situation and said, you guys need to reorganize, you need to put yourself into feature teams or whatever it might be. And all of a sudden, System 1 is screaming, I do not want my identity changed. And they say, oh, this Kanban thing's not for us. When you hear a story like that, the person who did it did not understand the Kanban method. Right? Anyone who's wearing a white lanyard here is a Lean Kanban University professional or a Kanban trainer or a Kanban coach. Wolfgang, you should have one. These people understand the Kanban method. They do not install Kanban in a way where it fails. We can correlate successful installation with people who've had the training because they understand where the rocks are and they know how to avoid them. All right, so the key principles start with what you do now. Do not come along and say, whatever you're doing now is wrong, because you know what? At least half of you are running profitable companies, so you're doing something right. It's a little bit more respectful to say, you know, you guys must be doing something right. Let's see if we can help make that better. And agree to pursue evolutionary change. In other words, get agreement that that 20th century McKinsey-style model of A to B transition is not what you're going to do. That instead you're going to adapt to your current situation and you're recognizing that that situation is complex. And initially respect roles, responsibilities, and job titles. That's there very specifically to avoid invoking System 1 objections. Understand the human beings in the process. Change management, developed in the 1920s, was designed for silicon-based life forms. And that's why it's not working. Because we're not at a point where we have silicon-based life forms running the workplace. and I actually believe we will not get there this century. We might produce a 50-fold improvement in carbon-based life form productivity, but we're not going to replace them with silicon-based life forms anytime soon. So the Kanban method is the idea that you need to put 6 practices in place. Remember that small list of 5 ways of attack? Well, here are our 6 ways of attack. Visualize the invisible work. Limit the work in progress. You could translate that as install a Kanban system, but that's way too specific. Manage the flow through that system. Make the policies explicit. Make all the rules of how you do stuff explicit, because that makes them discussable. Often a lot of productivity is lost because you've got stupid rules. Those rules may have made sense 10, 15 years ago because a specific situation came up in your business. That's long since passed, and no one actually remembers why you came up with that rule in the first place, nor do they understand its applicability. And when you ask someone, why do you do things this way? They'll say, well, that's the way we've always done it. Question those things. Implement feedback loops. I'm going to talk more about this. Right? Jeet Kune Do is entirely based on the feedback loop of fighting a live opponent. The only way that a practitioner of Jeet Kune Do can develop their own personal style of Kung Fu is to practice doing it with opponents. And improve collaboratively and evolve experimentally. It's in parentheses here, using models in the scientific method. In other words, we're not talking about random mutation here. Right? We can actually apply a bit of system 2 to the problem, and it's more a guided evolution. Right, so the start with what you do now thing is all very well. We use the practices of the Kanban method to catalyze the change. How do you know whether a change you've just made is actually an improvement? Well, those of you who know anything about biology, which is probably not many like me, because you're all computer scientists or engineers, probably dropped biology at school at the earliest opportunity. In biological evolution, something survives and thrives if it is fitter for its environment. So how do we know whether our process, our workflow, our service delivery, how do we know if that's fitter for its environment? Well, we need to know what the customer values. And if we know that, we have a fitness criteria for evaluating whether we're doing better or not. Right? So the concept of knowing whether your mutation, the change you're making in your process is better, is you need to measure it against a fitness criteria. So what are the fitness criteria? Fitness criteria are metrics that will measure an observable external outcome that our customers care about. And if you're doing some kind of knowledge work service, or for that matter, delivering pizza or cups of coffee or burgers in a fast food restaurant, what people care about are things like the delivery time, the quality, the predictability, and in certain domains, the safety or conformance to regulatory requirements. There are other ways that we can measure fitness criteria: customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, surveying, that kind of thing. How many of you know this guy, Steve Denning, Mr. Radical Management? His radical management idea is that there's only one metric we care about, and it's Net Promoter Score. So, Net Promoter Score is a fitness criteria. It's a way of judging customer satisfaction. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it uses an 11-point scale, 0 through 10. And we ask a question, something like, would you recommend our product or service to a friend or colleague? Score 0 through 10. And if you vote 9 or 10, you are a promoter for our product. You're actually out there selling it for us. If you vote 7 or 8, then you're neutral. You're at least not saying anything bad. but if you vote 0 through 6, you're not saying anything good enough that it's actually going to help us sell things. And you can add up the number of people who are promoters and subtract off the detractors, and that gives you a net score. And lots of companies do this stuff now. They do this surveying of their customers. We have a banking client in Eastern Europe, and their retail banking people are surveying this all the time. So their directors, the senior executives, their executive committee, they get these reports every month. Here's your new net promoter score. And they look at it and think, oh, that's cool. What the heck are we supposed to do with this number? Because the problem with the net promoter score is it does not tell you what to do. All it tells you is you're likely to be a winner or you're likely to be a loser. And if it's telling you you're likely to be a loser, there are no clues about what you should do. So if you're the CIO or the COO of a big bank and you just got your new net promoter score and it went down from last month, it's not telling you anything about what you should change in your organization to make it go up next month. So it's a feel-good sort of metric. It is a fitness criteria, but it's not one that's particularly useful from a pragmatic and actionable perspective. So can we do better than this? Well, if you're in any kind of service industry, it turns out there are 4 metrics that the customer of the service tends to care about: lead time, quality, predictability, safety, conformance to regulatory requirements. Let's consider this for pizza delivery. You call from home for home pizza delivery. What do you care about? How fast it comes, that it's still hot when it gets delivered, and if you ordered pepperoni, you don't want it Hawaiian. Do you care about whether the delivery boy broke any laws while delivering it to you? Probably not. Right? You don't really care whether he ran a red light or broke the speed limit. On the other hand, do you care about health and safety in the pizza restaurant? Do you care about whether your pizza is going to poison you or not?
Sorry, afterwards.
After. For everyone else's reference, these guys are from Poland and Germany, where evidently they don't worry too much about food safety. Right, if you need a medical procedure, this is all very American language, so I apologize here. If you need to go into hospital to have some surgery, what do you care about? You care about short waiting time, you care about a short procedure, you care about short recovery time. Right? You care about predictability. Ever know anyone who turned up at an NHS hospital for a surgery and was told, oh, sorry, could you come back next week? We've overbooked. Right? I've heard those stories. Right? That's pretty inconvenient. You're going to be upset. And we certainly care about safety, right? Low risk of complications, and we expect regulatory health and safety procedures to be followed. So it turns out that whether you're buying a cup of coffee in a Starbucks, a burger in McDonald's, ordering a pizza, or going for a medical procedure, the metrics that we should be measuring are the same. For almost all services, they're very, very similar. Lead time, predictability, and quality are almost always important, and the safety one is optional depending on context. We do need to validate that our fitness criteria are correct. Simple question. Excuse me, Mr. Customer, what is it you care about when you order your pizza? Right? Now, if you work in IT operations, you run a whole bunch of services. Go ask people what they care about. In software development, a lot of things we often don't think of as services, but your architecture department is a service or a set of services. Your database administrators are a set of services. Your user experience department's a set of services, and so on and so on. You are running a service-oriented organization, even if you're not fully aware of it. Find out what people care about, and you're going to find that lead time, predictability, and quality keep coming up. Whether it's your architects, your DBAs, your user experience people, your testers, your security experts, it's the same criteria that will help you determine the fitness of the service provision. This is real data from the CME Group, Chicago Mercantile Exchange. This is actually 2 different development organizations at 9X. How many bankers here? Not that many, a few. So you guys know what I'm talking about, right? CME Group, 9X, that kind of stuff. So what we're mapping here is the lead time distribution for completed change requests in these 2 9X systems. And you'll see that System A here has a mean of 17 days, and they have a lot in the 5 to 10 day range, but at the other end of the scale, 65 or greater. Meanwhile, System B has a mean of only 12 days, and there's nothing exceeds 30 days. Which of these is fitter? You intuitively would say, oh, it's the one on the right. The correct answer is we do not know, because we don't actually know what our customers care about. We know they probably care about lead time, but how long? You know, if you order a pizza, what's a reasonable delivery time for a home order pizza? 20 minutes, 30 minutes? Right. If they delivered it in 5 minutes, you would be shocked. You'd be like, oh, I'm not ready yet. Right. So there's no point in over-provisioning. There's no point in having 5-minute home delivery pizza. People are not going to pay extra for that. But on the other hand, if it took an hour, you know, so you need to know where the threshold is. Well, at these groups at 9X, they know where the threshold is, right? So they've measured that stuff. And this second distribution is showing stuff that was delivered on time against that threshold or early. So the 0 is within expectation, and everything to the left is early on this side. And then to the right-hand side of 0 is late, beyond the customer tolerance. And now that we know that, we can see that System B delivers 5 out of 7 things within expectation. System A only delivers 3 out of 7. System B is fitter. Oh, sorry. Too quick. System B is fitter now that we know this. Business risks, fitness criteria, classes of a service should all align. So if you were to ask people, what do you care about? And some of them say, well, we really care about fast delivery. You could say, well, would you pay extra for that? And now you give that work a different class of service. Maybe internally it's not pay extra, but it's the idea that there's a different risk associated with it, so it needs to have a different class of service. It's probably the same metric, just a different expectation. This is the idea of shelf life, right? So what would it take in terms of fitness to pursue a short shelf life strategy, a business where you're releasing product that only live for days, weeks, or months? Oh, whoops. And I'll just blow this whole thing out here. All right, so short shelf life would be days, weeks, or months. Medium is months, quarters, 1 to 2 years. Long is years or decades. So imagine that we were in a business that was very seasonal. We did stuff for the holiday seasons, things like Christmas, Valentine's Day, Easter, Halloween. It is considered a holiday in the United States for some strange reason. And so on, right? These things have short shelf life. Well, in order to do that, we need to be able to replenish a Kanban system very quickly. We need a short lead time. We need to be able to deliver frequently. So the basic system dynamics of Kanban tell us how fit we are. So we could be gathering those metrics and reporting them, and if we can't replenish the system frequently, like daily or weekly, if we could only do that monthly or quarterly, we're actually not very agile, we're not very responsive. If our lead times are long, measured in weeks or months, and our delivery is infrequent, then it's challenging to pursue short shelf life opportunities because we need to be able to respond quickly, and we also need to be highly predictable. That if you're targeting Valentine's Day with a software launch, when do you launch the software? Imagine you've got a website promotion. When do you put that on your website to promote Valentine's Day? January, first, second week of January, that would be good. What if you suffered a 1-month delay because you were unpredictable? You've totally wiped out that opportunity, right? You need high predictability to pursue a short shelf life strategy. You can tie your strategic planning to your capability and understand whether you're fit for the purpose. Running out of time here. Okay, so evolutionary change has no defined endpoint, right? We have a process, we can evaluate its fitness, and we decide, well, it's not as fit as we'd like, so we're going to make a change, and we can evaluate the fitness of that. Our process is evolving here. Evaluate the fitness and say, well, we could still be fitter, so we make another change, and we evaluate the fitness of that, and we say, oh, whoops, that one wasn't as good as the previous one. Now we could roll back. We could go back to the previous one, perfectly reasonable. But actually, there's also another choice. You can roll forward, just evolve again, make another change to the process. Both of these are legitimate strategies in guided evolution. And we continue to evaluate the fitness. In other words, it's always outcome-driven, and it's based on what customers value. It does not matter what processes you've adopted, right? There is no process checklist for Jeet Kune Do. Even the intercepting fist does not need to be included for it still to be Jeet Kune Do. It's whether or not the combatant feels more competent. And in our world, it's whether or not we're satisfying our customers better. Our future process is emergent. Now you understand why this is a challenge for consultants. There's no way to know if they're done. How do they get paid? Well, it's a different consulting model to sell Kanban. You need to get people to recognize that they should be measuring their own fitness, and they should pay you whether they're getting fitter or not. So if we're thinking about Kanban through a Cynefin lens, right, a simple Kanban system, one simple Kanban system would be down here. Single work type, single class of service. A deep Kanban system, multiple work types, multiple classes of service, that would be in the complicated domain. The Kanban method exists over here. And those of you who were at Lean Kanban Benelux 2 years ago will recognize that this slide's the same as it was 2 years ago, that's good. I like that. It's encouraging that we actually understand this stuff well enough that ideas survive for 2 years. Right? The Kanban systems alone are not enough, right, in this unordered domain. We need the feedback loops. And I'm going to overrun on time, Mr. Room Monitor. Right, so the feedback loops in Kanban are these things: the stand-up meeting, the system capability review, and the operations review. And these are documented in the book, except the middle one, which I thought this was just what managers do. And I thought I was writing a book about Kanban, so I didn't bother to include it. I'll fix that in a future book. And in order to know whether our system is these feedback loops, people standing in front of the board maybe suggesting a process change. In order to know whether the process change is an improvement, we need to use the fitness criteria. And you should always use the fitness criteria, regardless of which level of feedback. So this is a team standing in front of a board. This is managers to subordinates. This is a whole set of different people from different Kanban systems talking about the system of systems. It's always the same metrics, right? You need to disintermediate. You need to make the business risks transparent the whole way through the system. Get rid of the middlemen, That would cause a System 1 objection. That's an advanced class topic. Expose the business risks the whole way through the system. That's why we use things like different colors of tickets and lots of decorators on the tickets. Right? Do not hide them behind proxy variables like priority. If you pass priority around your organization, you are exposing yourself to a lot of risk because you're hiding the real risks. And people make bad decisions. So the theme of this conference was making better decisions. If you do these things, you make better decisions. Disintermediate, make the business risks transparent through the whole system at all levels, and use fitness criteria to measure whether you're fitter for purpose or not. Your decision making will get better. So we saw this slide earlier, so I'm going to skip over it. We can use some other metrics to look for improvements. This is a technique called blocker clustering, collecting pink blocker tickets from Kanban boards and perhaps monthly doing some sort of retrospective where we cluster the sources of the blocking issue and the source of delay and then identify the cost. And this is from Klaus Leopold. And you'll see that on the clustering, what they're doing is some arithmetic here. And these ones cost 130 days of delay that month. So now they're going to target the root cause of that delay and eliminate it, and they'll get back 130 days of lost time in future months. All right, so metrics like this help us focus on improvement. Right, so here's the key here. Right, your metrics should either be fitness criteria or they should be evaluating or guiding specifically targeted changes. And if it's not one or the other, you do not need them. And your metrics for guiding improvement should be temporary until the improvement's completed and then discarded. Because the only metrics that should be permanent are the fitness criteria, and even those might evolve over time because you should keep asking your customer, is this what you care about? So conclusion, the future of creative knowledge work should be inspired by Bruce Lee and Jeet Kune Do. Train with live opponents. No kata, no dryland swimming. In other words, no defined processes that you install. Stop installing processes out of textbooks. Stop trying to design the future. Let the future evolve. All right. Our opponents are uncertainty and risk. Engage them directly. Expose those risks in the system. Disintermediate. Make them transparent the whole way through. Visualize and make them explicit. Right. And at all three levels of reporting. Teach beginners to set up safe-to-fail learning environments at individual workflow and business unit levels. Learning environments are things where there's feedback loops, where people can understand and learn. Things like the stand-up meeting, the system capability review, the operations review. Make it safe for people to participate in those. Evolutionary methods are required to help us manage in complex environments. This is sort of scientific fact. Right? If it's complex, you need emergent practice. If humans are involved, the environment is complex. There is a System 1 between the ears, and it does not behave like a silicon-based life form. Fitness for purpose and sustainability come from developing strong adaptive capability. And that's it. And I think I'm only 2 minutes over and we started late.